Welcome to the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. We're going to explore ways to sharpen our diagnostic skills, find learning resources, and hear from experts in the automotive field. This episode is brought to you by L1 Automotive Training and Keith Perkins. If you're looking for education on module programming, J2534, EEPROM work, key and immobilizer, electrical diagnostics, or drivability diagnostics, Keith has a website, l1training.com, that's got over 60 hours of training videos on all those subjects and more. When I first started out doing mobile, I utilized Keith's videos on module programming in J2534 in order to get my head wrapped around what I would need for the tooling, the computers, the software setups, what kind of obstacles I would be up against when I'm out there programming modules on cars. And it was a huge benefit to me. And I continue to use the training videos that he has on his website. So I strongly recommend checking out l1training.com. The link is in the show notes. Hey, what's going on, automotive world? Welcome to another episode of the Automotive Diagnostic Podcast. My name is Sean Tipping, and I'll be your host once again for this week's episode. Thank you so much for joining me. This week on the show, we're going to be talking about ADAS warning lights on the dash. And sometimes we get into these where there are warning lights on the dash and there's nothing immediately obvious as to why that warning light is on. And that's the main topic of this show, right? If you've got a code and the code tells you what to do, okay, just follow that. But as we know, as working on these vehicles, that it's not always incredibly straightforward as to why a warning light is on with one of these advanced driver assistance systems. Now, some of you listening deal with this a lot, and you're probably familiar with some of the things that I'm going to bring up today and even more. And some of you maybe haven't seen a whole lot of these systems. You haven't worked on or diagnosed some of these systems, but obviously as time progresses, you're going to be seeing more and more of them in your shop. And the one thing about, well, it's not the one thing, but one thing about ADAS is that there are a lot of manufacturer and brand specific things that you'll have to learn, especially the terminology. It's acronym soup when it comes to the different systems. And you can have, something like a blind spot module, and there's 6 or 7 different acronyms that are used to classify the blind spot module depending on the brand that you're working on. Same thing for a camera in the windshield, same thing for the front radar. Everybody's got their different term that they're going to use for that system and exactly what it does. And even within a front radar, you can have 2 components depending on the model or the trim level that it's a front radar unit if you want to classify it as that, but it does 2 different things, right? One of them is just for emergency braking, and then the other one is going to be for adaptive cruise, or both, but it can be named different things depending on which vehicle it's actually installed in and what options it was given. So there's a lot to know about these systems, and you're going to have to read up on the car that you're working on or know the brand that you're servicing pretty well before you're jumping into it. So obviously service information is your friend there. There's a lot of info out there on, you can Google and YouTube and figure out this stuff, but it is a good thing to understand what you're dealing with when you're getting into a diagnostic on an ADAS system, just so that you're clear on what module does, what component is named what. And it is quite a bit sometimes. And then, we can even get past the components and the functions on the car and then look at the control modules that you see with the scan tool, and like trying to figure out which is which on a Nissan can be actually pretty challenging, because you've got ADAS module 1, ADAS module 2, ICC 1, ICC 2, laser radar, and it does get a bit confusing again, so you read up on it. So take some time there to understand what you're working on, take a step back, get everything in line so you know exactly what I'm actually going for and what the warning light is actually pertaining to. And that's kind of where I'm going with this today is, we get in these cars and we see, or we get called to a car to diagnose it and we see, okay, there's a warning light on, maybe one of the systems is not functional. Where do we go with it and what do we actually look at? Now, of course, you're going to scan it. You're going to look for codes. Okay. Again, that's obvious. And if you have that, you're going to be going down that path and, the service information is going to guide you to what you need to do in most cases. But sometimes you get these lights on and there aren't codes or there aren't real obvious codes that point you to a direction that you need to go. Now, one of the most common things that we see here, and we've been seeing this for a while, it's not anything necessarily new, is with Toyota and Lexus vehicles. They have something in the control modules on newer models. I don't know exactly when it started, but if you go 2020 plus, everything's going to have this. And I know there was ones prior to that as well, but we know if it's 2020 plus and we're getting called to a Toyota, hey, there's a light on, one of the symptoms isn't working, we don't have any codes, is that you want to be looking at the ROB or record of behavior data that's stored within the module. Now, depending on the tool you're using, you can look this data up in the specific module that has it under special functions, or some of the tools will allow you to just look at the entire vehicle's record of behavior and it'll break it down by module. And really all this is just another set of diagnostic trouble codes, but it's accessed differently through the module. And this can pertain to a lot of different things, but a lot of the time what we see is these are advanced driver systems that have information for you within the record of behavior. And if there's an error that is going to be constant within that ROB data, a lot of the times it's going to disable a system and throw a warning light. But if you're just doing a regular code scan, you might not see any codes in there. And it could be just as simple as, hey, the radar is dirty or the windshield is obstructed, or, it could be a misalignment. It could be other things as well, too, that could cause an ADAS warning light and ROB data. And I'll actually mention one here because this one, we actually got called out to do an ADAS calibration. The shop wasn't exactly sure why the warning light was on, but they just assumed, okay, it's an ADAS warning light. This system does not work. I think it was the lane keep assist that they were trying to get to work, but it wasn't functional. There was a warning light on the dash for one of the ADAS systems. They said, hey, can you come out and calibrate it? Okay, cool. It's X amount. We'll bring out our targets. We'll get it set up. And for the windshield camera, it's actual targets for this. It was a 21 Sienna, and you set up these targets and calibrate it with the scan tool. And then for the radar, there's a cone, and a lot of times we'll just bring the radar cone with us just in case, because we don't always know what we're getting into on these vehicles up front. We ask a lot of questions and we have a script that we run to try to get the information, but you never know. Anyways, we get there and we find that, there are no codes in the vehicle that indicate there's like a misalignment or anything. Now, it does have a warning light on the dash for the forward camera, and there's no codes in that module, but if you go into the ROB data, it allowed you to see what was going on. And it was something a little different than what we normally see. Again, obstruction, misalignment. It's kind of what I was thinking I was going to find. But it actually was referring to a security key mismatch. Now, this vehicle was actually running, operating. It started fine. Literally, the only thing that the customer facing that they could see was wrong was that this warning light was on the dash and that the ADAS systems didn't work. And again, the ROB data indicating that there's a security key mismatch. Now, if you look into this, and there was some digging here to figure out exactly what this meant. And I was kind of thinking like, hey, has a module been replaced? Was it a camera? Was it a radar or something in there? And it turns out, looking at the ROB data and looking at the rest of the system, that the engine control module had actually been replaced with a used one. And you could actually look at the engine control module and you could see writing on it as well. Okay, yes, this is definitely a junkyard one. Now, someone had actually done 2 of the 3 steps that are necessary in the replacement of the module. They rewrote the VIN, which you can do with a scan tool, an aftermarket scan tool. They did the immobilizer matching, meaning that this episode is brought to you by autorescuetools.com and Isaac Rodell. If you are looking to get into module programming, but you are not sure what kind of laptop you're going to need or how to set it up for programming, Isaac is your guy. He can set up laptops specifically to do control module programming for specific brands with partitioned hard drives and all the software that you're going to need to do this. He also sells key cutting equipment, scan tools, and other diagnostic equipment. I bought some stuff from him in the past and the support is phenomenal. So I highly recommend checking out the website. Again, that's autorescuetools.com. The link will be in the show notes. That the security handshake between the ECM and the immobilizer, this is it's not the 4 to 13 style where you would ground the pins of the DLC and leave it for 30 minutes. This one's actually done through the scan tool under special functions, but the same idea. And someone had done this, right? Because you're not going to have a used ECM work in one of these to actually start and run the vehicle if you hadn't matched the immobilizer system. So the question is, okay, why do we have a security key mismatch? So this is actually different than the immobilizer handshake, to actually disable the vehicle. This is with the ECU security key. And this is a newer process on these Toyota vehicles. Again, I don't know the exact starting date for this, but it was somewhere around 2021. Basically, the vehicles that required you use GTS, and I realize that's the official scan tool platform for all of Toyota, but about that time that they started introducing GTS as the scan tool platform, there is an option through that tool to do the ECU security key reset. And what that does, to me, I'm more familiar with the Chrysler setup. This is more of like a proxy alignment and less to do with actual immobilizer data, because this is not preventing the vehicle from starting. It's not actually tied in with the immobilizer of the vehicle, but it does say ECU security reset. And what it does when you run it in GTS is it's going to look through all the modules, see which ones need to be matched, and then it will do a security write. Now you have to be logged in for this. You got to have an official account with, Toyota GTS. I mean, you could do a short-term sub and use a JBox. That's what I'm doing on this one. But you have to purchase a sub through Toyota TIS and get that all set up on your laptop in order to run this. And I'm not familiar with another tool that can do this. If there is something out there, I'd be very curious to know about it. But right now, in order to do that security reset, you need to use GTS. So that wasn't done when this used module was installed. Maybe the person didn't have GTS. Maybe they weren't aware of it because, again, it's not super obvious. The car will start and run, and there wasn't any codes in the ECM, but it's not completely matched, and you get this warning light on the dash. There were ROB codes in other modules as well, but customer facing, that was the only thing that they saw that was wrong, and understandably so. Hey, there's something wrong with my ADAS system. Well, it just doesn't agree with the information that is in this used control module. Now, it worked, ran the ECU security reset, and everything was good. Warning lights were off, cleared all the data. It's good to go. But a couple things on those Toyotas to watch for, both the ROB data and that ECU security reset, which you're going to need GTS to run that. Now, the other thing that we see on vehicles is warning lights that are on, again, that we get there with no codes, and there's actually nothing wrong with the vehicle, meaning that there are no broken systems. There are no issues that need to be repaired or fixed, but there's a warning light on the dash. And you can actually see this across a few different brands, but General Motors is the first time where I ran into this. I believe it was on an 18, it was either a Malibu or an Impala, but the shop called me in because they had just gotten this car in on trade. It was a used car lot and they were going through it. And there was a warning message on the dash, the little center information thing in the middle of the cluster that said forward collision reduced. It would come on at startup on the dash. No codes were present. And there was nothing like obviously wrong with this vehicle except for that light coming on. And look through scan data and again, check for codes. Really didn't find anything. But if you do some reading, and this is actually really important to know for a lot of different makes and models, if ADAS systems are turned off for one reason or another, let's say the customer did it, let's say maybe you had some sort of battery reset and things turned off that way, you will get warning lights on the dash that are basically an indication to the customer that, hey, your system is turned off. And all you need to do is go into wherever those settings are determined and flipped on and off and make sure everything is turned on. And that's the way I handle this. If I have a warning light for an ADAS system, I don't have a code in any module or, the ROB data for the Toyotas, I will go and make sure that everything is actually turned on. And I've talked to some people who, if they do ADAS calibrations at all, they manually go in and turn everything on because they don't know, what systems did the customer have activated before or after. And that's not a bad way to do it. But especially in this case, if you see warning lights, you don't have any direction, figure out where this stuff is controlled. Now, that could be through the instrument cluster, but it could also be through the center stack, the infotainment unit, whatever that is, the radio, the touch screen. A lot of vehicles will have controls and vehicle settings there and also within the instrument cluster. So you got to figure out where is it actually controlled. Now, this particular GM was through the center stack, through the center console. Now, we've seen this a few other times on various GMs. I've seen it on the trucks, like the Yukons and stuff too. Same thing, warning lights on. You just have to turn the system on. And there's different parts of it as well, because it's not just having the actual systems on, it's making sure that everything is on about them. And what I mean by that is for the forward collision in this particular vehicle, if you just set it to alarm, it will say that the forward collision is reduced. It'll have that warning light on. There is an alarm and brake. So you have different options for the settings of these. And they give that to the customer so that they can change how these systems operate, which if you've driven a vehicle with ADAS systems, that's nice to have because sometimes they're over aggressive. They're beeping at you and pulling the steering wheel all the time. And you'd like to be able to kind of turn that stuff either off or at least down, reduce the sensitivity of it. And that's kind of what this is okay, we'll give you a warning if there's a forward collision approaching, but we're not going to hit the brake unless you turn that on. And again, the setting for this one, the alarm only was on, but not the alarm and brake. So as soon as you flip that way, the warning light turns off. Okay. So again, just many of you have run into this with ADAS systems before and you're familiar with this, but for someone who isn't, who hasn't dealt with this, is really good, quick information to get you to a fix or just to realize like there really isn't anything to fix. It may just be instructing the customer on how that system operates. And of course, maybe you just fixed something. Maybe there wasn't a complaint, but you're like, why is this warning light on? Did I not do the calibration correctly? Did I break something? No, the customer might have just had the system turned off and they're just used to the warning light being on. But that is the case in a lot of vehicles. And I'll actually come back to that for the fourth vehicle I touch on. But before that, there are some vehicles where you can have warning lights that are on and you don't have any codes, and it's not that the system is manually turned off. Okay, there's a ton of different vehicles out there. They're all set up different ways. I kind of consider like ADAS systems, they're in their OBD1 phase of just, it's kind of the Wild West. There's no strict protocols is across the board on everything. And so certain vehicles are going to operate a little bit differently than others. And of course, you would expect Nissan to fit that bill of doing something strange. This was a Nissan Rogue that we dealt with that had it was the forward camera warning that was on this thing, and it would just blink. So this is the little amber crash symbol that's over in the speedometer. It's two vehicles with a little collision symbol between them, and it would just blink. And that was it. There was no codes. There was no anything indicating that there was, a problem somewhere except for this light that was blinking, and the system did not work. I think when you would hit the button, it would give you a message in the on the center information center and the instrument cluster saying that it was unavailable. But other than that, nothing happened. And so this is the AEB warning light for this vehicle. And if you do some research, which I had to do for this one, I spent a lot of time just staring at the light, going through each module, checking things, and come to find out they have a service bulletin about this. I actually think a friend of mine, PJ, alerted me to this at the time I was working on it. But there's information from Nissan that I think they release for their technicians and for their customers explaining a reason why this warning light might be on and blinking with no codes or no indication that something is wrong. And basically what they're saying to check for here is an obstruction of either the radar or the camera, depending on, which light is on, but that you can just have a dirty windshield or something obstructed on the windshield or on the radar that could cause this to happen. And this was a long process on this particular Nissan. But what we ended up finding out was that the camera had been changed out on this at some point or another. Or I'm sorry, the windshield had been changed out, but the camera had been taken off and put back on to the windshield of this camera or this vehicle. And where the camera mounted to the windshield, we actually removed it at one point. There was an actual speck of dirt right in the center where that camera was looking. Because we had tried calibrating this thing and it's failed, and we looked at the outside of the windshield and we didn't see anything obstructing it, and eventually took that camera out, and I have a picture of this little piece of dirt that's just stuck to the windshield right in the center of where that camera's looking out. We cleaned it up, got that out, glass cleaner, get it all clean, put it back together. It passed calibration immediately and everything worked, and then that light stopped blinking, and that was it. But this was something where, Nissan's put some information out there saying, hey, you might see this blinking light. Here's what you should be looking for, because there's no other indicators on the car as to what's wrong. I did end up looking through some data PIDs on this one, and there was a couple that I think indicated that at least, hey, the problem's with the camera, that there's something disabling the actual camera system as opposed to the radar of the vehicle, but it wasn't much more than that. It wasn't saying hey, there's an obstruction. Now, this was an older Nissan. I think this was a 2017. And so this may not be the case with the newer ones. Obviously, they change things all the time, but it's very possible you could see, a vehicle of that age in your shop. All right, so the last one I want to touch on, this one was done recently. This was a 22 Jeep Wagoneer. And this actually was very similar to when I mentioned you could have a light on because the system is not enabled. And that's what was going on here with this 22 Wagoneer. It was the amber forward collision pedestrian warning indicator on the dash. And so this is just, again, it was on and there was no codes, anything about it, no codes in the vehicle. I think this thing was all clear except for one body module with some obscure code that didn't have anything to do with this. But as far as the ADAS systems go, and the systems even related to ADAS for communication, the instrument cluster where the light is on, the center stack where the controls were for the settings, zero codes anywhere in this vehicle indicating that there was a problem. Now, the one thing I found was in the ADAS module for this vehicle, it showed the PEB status as off, and that is pedestrian emergency braking. And that's all it just said. It was off, and this warning light's on. And so I was thinking like, okay, I just need to make sure that this is actually turned on. And I struggled for a while looking through the instrument cluster settings and then looking through the center stack settings, and there was no option to turn the PEB status either on or off. So I looked through the actual sales codes for this vehicle because I was wondering, is this actually equipped on this vehicle, right? Is this 22 Wagoneer supposed to have this? Maybe somebody swapped in a part here that I'm not aware of, and one component, maybe the cluster, is looking for this to be on, but the other components can't turn it on because it doesn't exist. But turns out the PEB is equipped on this vehicle according to the sales codes right from Stellantis IOP. It's supposed to have it. And again, the cluster assumes that it should have it, and the ADAS module shows that it's, it could be on, but it's toggled, it's in the off position. Doing a little bit of digging. And, I mentioned that with these cars, as we did some digging, we did some research. You got to do that. You got to get out there, find whatever resources that you have, whether that be an aftermarket information, whether that be Google, YouTube, maybe you can access the factory information, even better, right? Obviously, you should gravitate towards the service information before you're going outside of that. But I did find information about this particular problem, both on the service information side and on just the generic Google side. With the Google side of things, I found that this is actually a common problem with this era of Jeep Wagoneer. And I think there was actually Grand Cherokees as well listed on here. But people would say the same thing, that, hey, I used to have an option to turn this system on and off. It is no longer there and my light's on. And that's where I was like, okay, maybe I'm onto something here, because I feel like there should be an option to turn this on, but I've been through every single menu on this car and through the scan tool as well. Absolutely no option to toggle it from off to on position, but it does appear to be off, and that appears to be causing the light. So then I switched my search over to the service information side of it. And not that I wasn't in there before, but I've got a more focused search on what I'm looking for here, and searching like PEB and then, the status of the ADAS systems. And I end up finding what I'm looking for here on the actual Stellantis IOP website. And this is where this was really helpful, was there's a star publication that I was only able to find through Chrysler's website. They do release some of the case numbers publicly where you can find them on Google. Some of them you can't. I don't know the exact reasoning behind one being, behind a paywall and not, but it's kind of like an internal service bulletin that didn't turn into a recall. They're used with Chrysler, and it's basically saying that, hey, this forward collision warning off indicator is on, and that you need to go into the settings in the center stack and then turn it back on. Now, it's not super obvious, but at the bottom of this, they mention that a flash over the air to the radio software may set the FCW and the PEB to off as a default after an over-the-air update to the software. Now, what they don't mention here is that this particular option would just be gone, but there's enough of information here that I'm looking at the screen in the star case, which looks like my screen, and I see the forward collision warning options. Yeah, those are there. The forward collision sensitivity, those are there. But the pedestrian emergency braking system, which I see in the picture in the star case, but I don't see on my car, I'm like, it is just gone. So this has to be some sort of software thing. Now, what happened exactly, I don't know. Everything I can see about the radio, the instrument cluster, the ADAS module, they all match the vehicle. Unless somebody did a really good job of, changing the VINs over. But this is like a 22 vehicle. I mean, it's possible, but it doesn't seem like that's the likely candidate. Can I maybe force software into these, modules and see what happens? So I go through and I do everything I can with YTech, checking for updates, checking for the correct level of software. All appears to be okay. I even went into the Uconnect website, which is the, infotainment center. A customer could potentially download software onto a flash drive and then do the update themselves on, certain year of Chryslers. But what you can do is you can type in your VIN number and it will tell you if you're up to date on the software on the Uconnect side. Because I was thinking maybe it's, not the scan tool programming side. It might be this actual Uconnect software, and something's going on with that. It said it was fully updated, and so it didn't really give me anything more than that. So at this point, I had enough time into it, but I had enough information to tell a customer, like, hey, here's what I'm dealing with. You've got this warning light on that basically it's toggled off, and it shows that in the scan tool, but I have no option to turn it on. It should be here. It's not. I would suggest taking it to the dealer and seeing if they are able to force some sort of software update on this radio, or, maybe they know what's going on beyond that point. But they agreed. They ended up taking it there. It was like a 3-week wait to get it into the dealership. But once they did, they were able to fix it without replacing any components. When they got the vehicle back, they had the option there to actually toggle it back on and off, like it's supposed to be there. So they didn't get a straight up answer of what the dealer did. My guess is there was some type of software, either forced software or software update or something to that infotainment center in order to turn that back on. Now, again, like I mentioned, I found some basically forums of Jeep owners that were indicating that they had the same thing happen. And then they brought it to the dealer, and the dealer was able to correct something. Or there was a couple people from older posts saying that the dealer didn't have a fix. I'm guessing they do now. Maybe you're at a Chrysler dealer. I know I've talked to a few people out there that work at Chrysler Jeep dealerships. Maybe you know more about this than I do at this point. But I thought it was interesting. And that's where I'm going to wrap this one up at is, you might have some of these ADAS warning lights. It's not always super obvious what they mean, but understanding the symptoms, really digging into everything you can with the scan tool, even going beyond codes, looking at data, ROB data, understanding exactly what systems are equipped on the car, how they are turned on or off, and then also digging to see, are there service bulletins that give me more information? What is in service information? What's out there on the web that can help me get to the conclusion faster? So with that all out of the way, we'll wrap this one up. Thank you for listening. But let's all get out there, start fixing the world one car at a time.
Yeah.